Described as Supergiant Games' magnum opus, an experience you'll never want to end, and a must-play. Today we're diving back into the vast labyrinth of the underworld to discuss our favourite aggressive roguelike dungeon crawler packed full of deities and every bisexual's mythological fantasy. Of course we're talking about Hades, the indie hit by Supergiant Games, who are also behind other phenomenal titles such as Bastion, Transistor and Pyre. And the reason I'm bringing this all up? Well, we are now officially just 1 month away from Q2 2024, which is when we were told we'd be hearing more about early access for Hades 2. If you'll recall, we were first made aware of Hades 2's existence during the Game Awards on December 8th, 2022. However, I wasn't aware until the 9th because, time zones, but I did enjoy waking up to a million messages from my friends checking up on me to make sure I'd seen the announcement. I can only hope that they do the same for Silksong. Anyway, Hades 2 is Supergiant's first ever sequel, and I can see why, given the unexpected mass success of the first game. 700,000 copies sold before even exiting early access, and then it surpassed that 1 million mark just 3 days after the official launch. It even reached the coveted tier of universal acclaim on Metascore's review aggregator and received high scores across the board from major publications, with critics applauding everything from the fast-paced combat to rich character design to the soundtrack that makes for fantastic background noise when you're writing a script about what an epic game it is. It even went on to win awards at the Golden Joysticks Awards, the Game Awards, the annual DICE Awards, or is it pronounced DICE? And it swept up at the 17th British Academy Games Awards. I don't think I need to say much more about what a tremendous game Hades is. So back to Hades 2. Along with its big reveal, Supergiant Games confirmed it would be coming to early access, and we'll hear more about that in 2023. Well, they weren't lying, because on September 14th, we got an update in the form of a blog post where they announced that a technical test would take place prior to the early access launch, and that both of those would be coming in Q2 of 2024. So, sometime between April and June, presuming they mean calendar year and not fiscal year. Typically you'd specify if it was fiscal year, and it can vary between countries, so I hope they do mean calendar year, otherwise my excitement is a tad unwarranted. Now let's move on to the two biggest questions, starting with, should you play Hades 2 in early access? If you got on the Hades train late, like myself, you would have missed out on the game's early iterations, and if you never looked it up, you'd be surprised about what was missing during that period. Before we get into it, do be mindful that there will be a Hades 2 closed technical test ahead of early access, so they are hoping to address any big technical or compatibility issues before releasing to the public, which I don't believe they did for the first game. So today, we'll focus on the bigger things that were missing. The Hades early access period was just under 2 years between December 2018 and September 2020. During that time, the game received a total of 47 patches of varying size. Right at the beginning, many of the NPC models and portraits were just placeholder images while the artwork was finalized, and that included key characters like Sisyphus, Orpheus, Patroclus, and even Charon. The biggest shock for me as someone who didn't play back then was that the game used to end, and let's put end in quotation marks because I mean the moment Zag would respawn in the House of Hades, after the Bone Hydra boss battle. Elysium, Styx, and the other surprises that I'll not spoil for you didn't exist back then. They didn't appear until what they've called the Beefy update, Patch 18, which hit the game in May 2019, 6 months after entering early access. The team were continuously adding new voice lines, boons, keepsakes, visual effects, artwork, enemies, and music throughout that entire 2 years. The game also only featured 4 weapons without any weapon aspects for that extra boost in gameplay variability. I don't know about you, but I very much need my aspect of Achilles' spear. I can't imagine playing without Raging Rush, even though I clearly must have played it at some point before unlocking it. Moving swiftly on, fishing, the house contractor, and the heat system were also added much later. That was a rather long-winded way to say, if you want to play Hades 2 in early access, prepare yourself for a potentially very bare bones game, without the rich narrative we know and love and all the fun extras. And I know what you're thinking, wow, thank you Captain Obvious. And it should be obvious, but we all know there'll be some people who played Hades post-launch when they heard from everyone else how good it is, and then they go into Hades 2 expecting something close to being done. I believe Supergiant have already confirmed in one of their blog posts that Hades 2 will be further along when it launches into early access than Hades 1 was, but if we prepare for the worst case scenario, we can only win here. If you are someone who played Hades for the story, you should probably give it a try later down the line. While we don't know what's going to be available in early access, they have confirmed that the story will expand with each update, introducing new characters, deepening relationships, and there'll be no conclusion until that 1.0 launch patch. If you are a console player, well, they haven't confirmed that consoles won't be involved in the technical test or early access yet, but it's certainly possible that you'll have no choice and get it later anyway. What they have said, and this is available on their official Discord FAQ that's being kept up to date, is that the Q2 2024 window is for launching into early access on Steam and the Epic Game Store, both of which are PC storefronts. If you are someone who loves the challenge of repeating runs and perfecting your builds, but would absolutely hate figuring out your preferences only for them to run a patch that nerfs or removes all your favourite abilities, you should also probably wait a bit. If you prefer to go in blind on full release and want to experience it in its full glory for the first time, definitely wait until then. However, if you are someone who'd love to help out the team, fully accept that nothing is permanent, and are prepared to provide feedback and upvote feedback on the Discord, then you might be a good contender to pick up the game when it launches day one into early access. Even better if you've played a lot of the first game or other roguelites or roguelikes. In short, I don't want anyone picking up the game pre-release and leaving negative reviews because it's not what they were expecting. You should not be expecting a full, complete game. The second question I wanted to cover in this video is, when can we expect Hades 2 to launch fully? Of course, we are now getting very ahead of ourselves here given the number of unknowns at play. We may have a release window for Hades 2 early access, which can change at any time, but we don't know an exact date for early access or the preceding technical test, how far along the game will be during either of those, how many patches they're expecting to deliver, the size of the game versus their desired end state, and so forth. What we do know is that it took 22 months for Hades to release with version 1.0. One could argue that it should take less time given their experience with Hades 1, and their admission that it will be further down the line than Hades was in early access when that went live. One could also argue that they might have chanced going bigger or more complex, so they'd be addressing new challenges that weren't present in the first game. If it somehow did end up taking the same amount of time, we won't be seeing version 1.0 until February to April in 2026. According to DDM, who reviewed the state of early access games available on Steam back in 2021, it's common for games to spend 2.5 years in early access, with the majority of those games from indie developers coming in at 3 different price points: free, $9.99, and $19.99. I'll link their findings below because it's quite interesting and a pretty short read. Both of these numbers support a potential release date in 2026, but I honestly don't think we can make a more educated guess until we see what state the early access version is in. It's definitely worth mentioning as well that Supergiant work on just one game at a time, and they started working on Hades 2 at the start of 2021, so we're already 3 years into development. When Hades launched out of early access, they had this to say via their blog. After 3 years in development, the result is by far the biggest, most feature-rich game we've ever made. Pyre, their release prior to Hades, released in July 2017, so that tracks. Pyre is also the only one of their games that I haven't played yet, but I'm so down to try it when I have the time. Back to Hades 2, I don't want to get your hopes up by explicitly stating something like, wow, we must be so much closer, given Hades was only in development for a few months before hitting early access, but I do think it's okay to be a little optimistic. I also want to quickly highlight something else they posted on the Discord FAQ. The game will have at least as much content from day one in early access as the original did back when it launched in early access on Steam. As a reminder, it launched on Steam a year after it launched on Epic Game Store into early access, which is a few months after they got that beefy update I mentioned earlier in the video. Also pretty promising, but still, I don't want to get your hopes up. Personally, I'm excited to get involved, provide feedback, and help whatever way I can. If you're the same, it's probably about time you get yourself on the mailing list or join the Discord if you haven't already. I'll keep you updated as and when I hear more information, but until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.